When we think about ancient Greece, our minds usually go to the big epic stories, right? To Achilles on the battlefield or Odysseus trying to get home. But there's this whole other side to ancient Greece, a voice that talks less about kings and heroes and more about everyday struggles, about injustice, and about just plain hard work.
Right at the very dawn of Greek literature, there wasn't just one great voice. There were two. So on one side, you've got Homer. He's the poet of the glorious past, of aristocrats fighting for immortal fame. And on the other side, you've got Hesiod, and he's looking at the tough, gritty reality of life for regular people.
So, okay, if Homer gave us the idea of the hero, who gave us the voice of the common person? The farmer, the person who's worried about fairness and just trying to get by.
Well, his name was Hesiod. And what's so interesting is that unlike Homer, who's this almost legendary figure, the ancient world talked about Hesiod like he was a real, historical guy. He actually steps into his own poems and tells us about his family and his life, which makes him feel incredibly close, even after almost 3,000 years.
So what was this story? Well, this is what makes him so different. He wasn't some court poet singing for kings. He was a guy with real problems, a very specific background, and a really strong sense of right and wrong.
Hesiod's story is rooted in a real place. His dad was a migrant who settled in a little town in central Greece called Askra. And let's just say Hesiod was not a fan of his hometown. He called it a miserable place, and this connection to a harsh, difficult landscape really shapes everything he writes.
And believe me, it gets even more personal. One of his greatest poems, Works and Days, isn't some grand adventure. It's basically a long poetic lecture to his own brother, Perses. Apparently, his brother bribed some local officials to get a bigger chunk of their inheritance. So the poem is part family complaint, part moral sermon.
And this is exactly why he's often called the father of Greek didactic poetry. It's a fancy term, but it just means his goal wasn't only to entertain you. He wanted to instruct you, to warn you, and to teach you how to make your way in a pretty tough world.
That's a fair question, though, right? Why should anyone listen to this farmer poet from a miserable little town? Well, Hesiod has a pretty amazing answer. It's a story about a divine encounter he had while he was out tending sheep on a mountainside. He claims that the muses themselves, the goddesses of inspiration, appeared to him and gave him the gift of poetry. But listen to what they told him. This is one of the most incredible lines in all of ancient literature. They don't just promise him the truth. They straight up admit that they can also spin beautiful lies.
So right from the very beginning, Greek poetry got how powerful it was. It knew that a beautiful song could be true, or it could just be a very convincing lie. And Hesiod puts himself right in the middle of that complicated reality.
Okay, so besides lecturing his brother, Hesiod also took on a slightly bigger topic, the entire universe. His other major poem, the Theogony, is his attempt to make sense of the divine world and put it all into one big story.
Now, this is not just some boring family tree of the gods. You should think of it more like a cosmic political drama. It's the story of how the universe went from total chaos to order, and how Zeus became the king of the gods, not because he was destined to, but through a series of really violent power struggles.
Yeah, the path to power was brutal. First, there was just chaos. Then you get rulers like Uranus, who gets overthrown by his son Cronus. Then Cronus gets overthrown by his son, Zeus. It's a story of generational warfare, and it ends with Zeus finally locking down power and bringing some kind of order to everything.
Okay, so if the universe has a just ruler in Zeus, why is life for us humans so full of suffering and hard work? Let's jump back to Works and Days to see how Hesiod tackles that question.
Hesiod uses these incredible myths to explain why things are the way they are. He tells the story of Prometheus stealing fire for us, and Zeus's payback. He creates Pandora, a beautiful but dangerous gift who unleashes all the hardships and sorrows we still deal with today.
He also lays out one of the most pessimistic views of history you'll ever read. He describes 5 ages of man, starting with a perfect golden age and then just declining step by step, all the way down to his own time, which he calls the miserable Iron Age, an era filled with conflict, injustice, and toil.
So what are you supposed to do in a world like that? Just despair? Well, not exactly. Hesiod's advice is surprisingly practical. He basically argues that in a world where you can't always count on other people to be just, hard work, real, honest labor, is a kind of justice in itself. It's how you keep your dignity.
And this is why Hesiod feels so incredibly current. He's not just some ancient poet talking about myths. He's the poet of our own frustrations with a world that so often feels unfair.
So let's circle back to that first comparison. Homer's world values heroic, aristocratic things, achieving glory that lasts forever. Hesiod's values are practical, they're anxious, they're about survival, hard work, and this desperate need for fairness in a world that isn't fair.
And this is why he's so important. He isn't the opposite of Homer, he's the other half of the story. Together, they show us that ancient Greece wasn't just one thing. It had room for both the heroic dream and the reality of hard work. One gives us something to aspire to, the other gives us the tools to survive.
In the end, Hesiod matters because his questions are our questions. Why do bad people seem to get ahead? How are we supposed to live in a world that feels broken? Is work just a curse, or is there honor in it? He doesn't give us easy answers, but that frustration, that search for fairness, that need to find dignity in what we do, that feels just as real today as it did nearly 3,000 years ago.